When authors do battle, they do it with words. They throw a story back and forth, each trying to write the other into a corner. The results can be terrifying, or they can be legendary. The challenger, representing the villain this week, is
Simon Canton.
And the defender, representing the hero, is
Myron J. Dansby, read by Simon Canton. The genre is science fiction archaeology battle. The hero is Peter Kingston, an archaeology doctoral researcher who's part of the team on Kepler 62e researching an extinct alien species. The aliens went extinct 6 million years ago, leaving behind tantalizing hints of their technology and culture. The villains are the Jupiter government. They are trying to block archaeological research on Kepler 62e because they're using it as a military facility, both for home system defense and for reverse engineering the technology left behind by the Kepler aliens. Their goals are to build the deadliest weapon ever created, while retaining plausible deniability of the site. A lady named Ilian is the Jupiter government's asset officer to the ruined city where Peter Kingston is working. She is feeding inside information to Peter, but needs to tread lightly because she's signed a confidentiality agreement preventing her from talking about the technology found on the planet. The time period is the year 3893 AD. Mankind has spread out for 2,000 light years in every direction from Earth. Kepler 62e was discovered only 50 years before and has been fought over ever since. Peter Kingston has the ability to recall anything he sees, reads or does, a photographic memory. As an ex-military intelligence specialist, he has more experience dealing with governments than anyone else in his field. Ilian is an expert on environments and research. She can find anything out about anyone, given enough time to do it. Ilian was born on Jupiter, and she walks around high-gravity worlds like a native. Neither Peter nor Ilian are very good at talking to people. Peter has been working at the site for months, poring over the obscure symbols written on the walls of the stone buildings. Most of them have collapsed long ago, but a few walls are still standing, and it's Peter's job to somehow work out what's written there. Despite staring at the symbols for hundreds of hours, he still has no idea how he's meant to understand what's written there. He knows Professor Meacham is growing impatient. Hundreds of doctoral candidates competed for the position on the trip, and Meacham seems to be reconsidering his choice of Peter. Peter hears someone behind him. Ilian walks up. Ilian is the representative from JCC, the Jupiter Cloud Coalition. He knows they put her on this obscure planet, but he's no idea why. Despite long conversations in the prior months, he's gotten no nearer to finding out either. Peter, Ilian says, haven't you memorized that wall by now? Months ago, Peter says. I keep hoping I've missed something. I've stared at every wall on this planet. They all have some symbols in common, but I've no frame of reference. We don't know what was important to these aliens. We need a Rosetta Stone, something that will give us a common link to any prior human writings, or even existing aliens. Well then, I have a present for you, Ilian says, beckoning to him. She leads him back to her tent and waves to her tablet. I've just been sent something found on another one of our bases. Peter picks up the tablet and looks at it. The tablet is showing familiar Kepler symbols, along with symbols of another type. This is Danusian. He recalls lectures on Danusian, the long-lived aliens that humans had encountered and fought with 200 years before. It says... Oh my, do you know what this says? Ilian shakes her head. You're the expert. This says that there's a weapon here. Peter's mind flicks through all the images of symbols he's seen, matching them with the symbols on the tablet. Peter spent the next 2 months using the Danusian writing to translate the symbols on the walls of Kepler 62e. He realized that he was right. There was a weapon, and it was on the continent that the humans had named Tagan. Tagan was the location of the first defense starbase, so named because it was the first defensive base between the Danusian Empire further out in the galaxy and the Earth Alliance. Getting to the continent wasn't a problem. There were numerous cities, towns and villages across it. The problem was that all of the symbols pointed to the heart of Tagan, in the middle of the mountain range. That mountain range contained the starbase, where only military personnel could go. Peter flew to the largest city on Tagan, went to the spaceport centre, to the military offices there, and filed for the right to enter the mountains. 3 days later, a representative showed up at Peter's door. Peter was fine with talking to people he knew well, but he froze up around strangers. The representative frowned at Peter. I'm here in response to your request to go into the Tagusta Mountains. The truth is that we don't think that's a very good idea, Professor. Peter cleared his throat nervously. It's important, sir. I wouldn't be asking if I didn't have a good reason. The representative took out a pen and made a note on his clipboard. All right, what is that reason? Peter knew that the military would take the weapon before anyone else could see it, so he decided to keep it a secret instead. I found writing that mentions a new way to conserve energy hidden there. If it's still there, it could benefit all humanity. Peter chewed his lip. He didn't know anything else that might get him permission to enter the mountains. The representative made another note. All right, well, it's a waste of time telling me any more. All I can do is make an appointment for you to see Admiral Tommy Gartz. Ultimately, he will be the one that can let you into those mountains. I wouldn't count on it, though. The Admiral will be back in town in 2 days. Do you want to talk to him? Peter nodded. Yes, please. The representative scribbled on a piece of paper and handed it to Peter. Then be at the Spaceport offices in 2 days at 0800 hours. Ilian watched the representative walk back towards the offices. He entered the building below her. She waited by the window, tapping her foot as the representative climbed the stairs. Finally he entered her office. Ilian didn't turn. She kept staring out at the shuttles arriving and departing from the port. Well, where did he want to go? The Tangustau Mountains, the representative said. Delay him for a week, Ilian said, and tell my assistant to prepare my shuttle. I'm going to supervise this operation myself. Ilian heard the office door close as the representative left. She turned and walked to her desk, keying on the communications device. After a few minutes, a holographic projection of Ilian's boss, Frank Lambden, appeared opposite her. Ilian bowed to him. Mr. Lambden, the research team appeared to have found a weapon on Kepler 62e of alien origin. I'm on my way to see about recovering it. Excellent, Frank said. Make sure to eliminate the research team as well. We can't have any loose ends. Ilian frowned. I don't think that will be necessary, Mr. Lambden. I've got them tied up in red tape here. They've got zero chance of finding that weapon before us. Frank smiled coldly. If you don't have the stomach for it, Ilian. No, I'll take care of it, Ilian said. I'll let you know when we find the weapon. Frank's image vanished. Ilian pressed another key on her desk and her assistant hurried in. Put a wet team on the researchers, Ilian said. They've served their purpose. Her assistant nodded. Your shuttle is ready outside. Ilian nodded brusquely and strode from the office. She hurried down to the shuttle port and got into her personal shuttle. She fell into a seat and let it whisk her off to the Tangustau Mountains. They would have to survey every mountain in the range to find the weapon, but it shouldn't take them more than a few days. Ilian didn't like that Peter would be killed. She'd always liked him, but you couldn't make an omelette without breaking a few eggs. 2 days later, Peter went to the military offices for his meeting with Admiral Tommy Gartz. The meeting went smoothly. They talked first about the mountains and then the current ways of conserving energy. Out of the blue, Admiral Tommy asked, If you could be more precise as to where in those mountains you want to go, then maybe I could cut some red tape and get you in. Until I learn more about it, well, you know how the government is. Military areas are for the military only, no exceptions. Peter studied the Admiral's face and thought, they know something and are fishing for more. I'm going to have to find an alternate way in. Peter cleared his throat. Well, Admiral, I read that the item I'm looking for is in the lower section of the mountains. At a guess, there are 75 mountains there, and it should be in the lower 10 someplace. Admiral Tommy smiled. Actually, there are 400 mountains in that range, Professor. Peter decided that confirmed it. Why would an admiral know how many mountains were in the range without having a reason to study them? Peter considered that if they knew about the weapon, then his life might be on the line. Peter spoke up. That's the best I can do, Admiral, until I find that ruined city in the mountains and translate some more of the writings, anyway. Admiral Tommy frowned. All right, well, I will put in your request to the proper channels, but I wouldn't count on a quick result. Peter smiled. Okay, I appreciate whatever you can do. Peter and the Admiral said their goodbyes and Peter left. After a few moments, standing at the main doors of the offices, Peter decided what he would do next. He went to Higgins Bar, just outside the downtown area, looking for a bartender called John, an old friend and a rebel to boot. John was behind the bar, working. He had just gotten back from lunch. Peter shook John's hand. John, can you help me out? John shot Peter a look. That depends what you need. Peter leaned in close and whispered, I think the research team are going to need protection. Do you have anywhere we can talk in private? John beckoned. Follow me. John led Peter into a back room and closed the door behind them. It isn't so much for me, Peter said, but the rest of the team may need protection from the military. Why? John asked. John and Peter had fought side by side. Peter trusted John to keep his secrets. Okay, the short version is that we found an alien weapon on Tagan. I need several people willing to go into the Tangustau Mountains, armed men willing to fight the government. I'll need more people to watch over the rest of the team too. If I'm right, we need to destroy that weapon before the military can get to it. John nodded. You should talk to the militia. Their leader, Michael Bass, will help you. First thing tomorrow, Peter said. How would you like to join us? There's no one I'd trust more at my back. John shrugged. Why not? Be warned, though, the military are always watching the militia. Let them, Peter said. They'll find them hard to defeat, and if the military goes after the militia, a small group can slip into the mountains and get the job done unnoticed. The militia is at a disadvantage, though. They don't have ships, John said. That's their problem, Peter said. If you're right, they'll jump at the opportunity to do this. It's important you don't tell them what you're going to do, John said. Let them think they'll get the weapon if necessary. Sure, Peter said. Pick a crew of 5 people you can trust, counting you and me. We'll meet back here in 2 weeks. Done, John said, smiling. Peter smiled back, left the bar and went back to the site to study more leads on the exact site of the weapon. Ilian stood behind the shuttle operator, watching him scan the mountain again. Nothing, ma'am, the operator said. We've scanned every mountain in the lower ranges twice. There's nothing here. Ilian nodded. She knew Peter must suspect something was up. Send a message back to the capital. Admiral Gartz is fired. Ma'am? The operator asked nervously. Do it, Ilian said. I have company approval. Tell the other shuttles to move into the high mountains. We've been misled. And take me back to the capital. I've got someone I need to talk to. An hour later, Ilian had John the bartender strapped into an interrogation chair. The MP said he'd been collecting weapons and feeding information to the militia. It didn't take much to whip up a warrant for his arrest. John Willington, Ilian said. You served with Peter Kingston for years. So what if I did? John spat. Does that give you a right to hold me here? An MP came in and whispered in Ilian's ear. No sign of the archaeological team or Peter Kingston. Ilian nodded, dismissing the MP. You surprise me, John. We've been letting you run your bar here for years. For you to turn on us like this? Maybe I don't like the company running things, John said. Maybe I think the militia are right. We need to throw off the yoke of your oppression forever. Ilian smiled. Don't be naive. The company has been running this planet for decades. You think a few toothless ex-military types can run us off? No. I know this is just a distraction. The real question is where Peter has gone to. Peter is an archaeologist. Maybe you should just check the dig sites, John said with a grin. We have, Ilian said. We've also been running down your known accomplices. 3 of them are missing. You wouldn't have to know where they are. John shrugged. Ilian frowned. A pity. My torture expert estimates you'll hold out for 6 hours. Let's see if he's right, shall we? Meanwhile, Peter met with the militia leader, Michael Bass. The militia took each of the archaeology team to different safe houses around the world. The militia had been working on uprising plans up until the minute John had disappeared. Peter didn't have time to wait on John. Luckily, John had given Peter the details for the other 3 on their team. Riley, a weapons expert, Joe, a doctor that worked as a field medic during the war, and Katarine, a communications expert. All of them had EMT and explosive training through the military. They were confident they could get the job done if Peter could lead them there. The militia had been agreeable to Peter destroying the weapon. They just didn't have the ships to counteract the military. Before he had disappeared, though, John had gotten them anti-aircraft weapons that should level the field if used correctly. Peter and his team left for the northern section of the mountains 2 days later. They were looking for a mountain called Highland. The city was over 700 feet below the surface, according to the ancient texts. The only way in was a natural cave on the south side of the mountain. Highland Mountain was the largest in the range, and no scanners had ever been able to scan that far down. Peter intended to supplement that with a device called an upreel that would disrupt any ship scanners in the area. Several militia had set off to the east and west of the mountains to plant decoy upreel devices that would disrupt communications and scanners. Peter and his team travelled around the coastline to the north and then started down into the mountains from the village of Navi. Ilian stared at the 4 thermal images walking slowly into the mountains. Excellent. Let me know exactly where they go. I want ground teams following them. I want a satellite overhead. Once we know which mountain they're going to, send in every soldier we have and let's finish this. The operator nodded to Ilian. Ilian walked out of the command centre and back to her office building. She had a stress headache that just wouldn't go away. Their attempts to scan the mountains hadn't worked. It had been weeks and her boss, Frank Lambden, was in danger of replacing her. As she reached her office, her assistant looked concerned. Mr. Lambden is on the phone again, ma'am. Ilian felt 16 kilos of pressure drop onto her shoulders. All right, I'll take it in my office. Yes, ma'am. Ilian walked into her office, shut the door, moved to the desk, and keyed on the comms device. Frank appeared, a cigarette in his hand. Cigarettes were highly illegal on Jupiter. He must have paid a fortune for a pack. Ilian, you continue to disappoint me. I've heard from my own sources that you haven't found the weapon, you've failed to eliminate the archaeology team, and Peter Kingston is on his way to retrieving the weapon himself. Ilian nodded. It's all according to plan, sir. We couldn't locate the weapon using scanners. The only way to get it now is to have Kingston lead us straight there. Don't worry, I have every soldier on the continent poised to eliminate Kingston the minute he shows us where the weapon is. This is your last chance, Frank said. Otherwise, I'll be putting you in for early retirement. Ilian tried to swallow and found it sticking in her throat. She didn't trust herself to speak. She just nodded instead. Frank keyed off the communications device. The instant his image vanished, Ilian sprang to her feet. She rushed from the office, calling to her assistant as she passed. Prepare my shuttle. I'm going to see to this personally. Ilian didn't wait for an answer. She jogged to her shuttle. The pilot was on his way to the shuttle as she reached it. As you value your life, get us to those mountains as quickly as you can, Ilian said. By this time, the militia had zeroed in on John's location and launched a rescue effort. Meanwhile, Peter skirted the base of the mountains, keeping to the woods to avoid being seen by the ships. As they travelled, he noticed a lot of military scouts around, so Peter instructed the communication specialist to send out a call for help. They used a codebook from the Trith uprising to communicate back to the militia. The code worked by substituting words for other words. The message the communications officer sent was, Rise cool aft Karma T error, meaning, the heat is on, create a diversion. The relay came back, Ill Oz, meaning, will do. The militia's message continued, telling Peter that the opportunity was too good to pass up. They would hit them immediately in force, where they would have to respond. The militia had been planning an attack for a while. They sent out messages to every militia group on the planet, telling them to start attacking. The local news began reporting on the attacks, and the military forces had to respond. They withdrew their forces from the mountains to cover all of the bases under attack. For every person the militia lost, the military lost 3. Once the pressure was off, Peter and his team kept going into the mountains. It took Peter and his team 3 days to get around the mountain to find the cave. As they stepped inside the cave, Peter looked at the calm mountain valley. I'm going to miss this place. Ilian stared at the 4 thermal images disappearing into the cave. All right, Captain Holt, are you ready? Captain Holt, standing nearby, looked like he spent every waking minute doing crunches and chewing glass. He grunted his assent. There are only 10 of you, and the people in that cave are trained specialists, Ilian said. I bite the heads off specialists for breakfast, Captain Holt said. He waved to his men and they all walked down to the cave. Ilian kept behind them, her gun in hand. She knew that if she didn't come back from the mission with the weapon, it wouldn't matter if she survived. Frank would make sure she didn't last long after that. Captain Holt and his men snapped on lights as they reached the cave. It opened into a long tunnel leading down into the earth. The soldiers kept going without hesitation, but Ilian thought that the walls looked an awful lot like they were closing in as she stepped inside. They walked carefully down the tunnel for a few minutes, until they finally saw lights ahead. The tunnel opened up into a massive cavern. In the centre of the cavern there was a gigantic metal ball resting on what looked like a large nest. Captain Holt and his men fell into a defensive posture and opened fire on Peter and his 3 assistants. 2 of them dropped before they even knew Captain Holt was there. Peter and the remaining man fell back behind the ball. Be careful, Captain, Ilian shouted. Don't harm the weapon, or there's no telling what would happen. Peter stood behind the giant ball, staring at it. On the side facing Ilian, there had only been symbols written, but on this side there was a panel. Riley, the weapons expert, shot at the military, keeping them back, while Peter studied the panel. Well, the good news is we don't need all that plastic explosives we brought, Peter said. This thing has a self-destruct. I set it for 10 minutes. Riley ducked back for a moment. Great, Peter, but how are we going to get out of here? We've now got a bunch of C4 we can use, Peter said. Sure, but they can cause a cave-in, Riley said. It's a chance we'll have to take. We can't let the military get to the weapon, Peter said. Riley tapped on the detonator of a C4 pack and threw it towards the entrance. When that goes off, you go to the right, I'll go left, and we'll meet at the entrance. A hollow boom rang out as the C4 detonated and Peter took off to the right. He reached the cave wall and ran along it before the military and Ilian could react. When the first of the military poked his head back into the cavern, Riley shot him in the ear. Peter threw another C4 at the entrance without setting the detonator. It was enough to scatter the military back up the tunnel. Peter and Riley positioned themselves at the tunnel exit. "Nice job, Peter," Riley called. "It's a trick I learnt in the Great War," Peter shouted back. "John did it there, and it saved the squad." Peter spotted Ilian in the tunnel. "Ilian, why are you doing this?" "It's my job, Peter," Ilian called back. "I knew I shouldn't have let you learn archaeology," Peter said. "Hindsight is 20/20, Ilian shot back. "You know we're fighting over a planetary environment manipulator?" Peter asked. "Then why are you fighting?" Ilian asked. "You came in shooting, dear," Peter said. "I'm not your dear, sweetie," Ilian retorted. Peter smiled, took out another C4 and tapped on it, setting the timer for 5 minutes. He set it down next to the tunnel entrance. Looking at Riley, Peter said, "You know there's a back door. The symbols talked about it." Peter said it just loudly enough for the military to hear. "Then let's make for that," Riley said, tapping the last of the C4 they had and throwing it towards the military. Peter and Riley took aim down the tunnel. The C4 exploded, causing a small cave-in. The military came running through the dust, expecting Peter and Riley to be escaping. Peter hit 2 out of 5 shots, but Riley hit 9 out of 10. Ilian was alone before she knew it. Ilian ran back up the tunnel, only to run into a militia squad on their way down. Peter and Riley ran up behind her, and she was caught. "We need to get out of here. The self-destruct is going to go off any minute," Peter shouted. They all ran back out of the cave, and 3 minutes later they heard the crump of an explosion, and the cave collapsed. The news later called it an earthquake.
Who do you think won the battle? Vote for a winner in the comments below.